Finding Hope looks at embracing the transformative power of hope and the profound impact it can have on our mental wellness. In a world that sometimes seems clouded by challenges and uncertainty, that ability to hold on to hope is not just a luxury, it's a lifeline. This podcast explores how hope can be a beacon of light in the darkest of times, elevating our mental well-being and in turn improving our physical health. Importantly, we examine the role of corporate South Africa as we enter our next 30-year cycle as a country. Today, we delve into the heart of corporate social responsibility in South Africa and the role that big business plays with Investec Bank CEO Cumesh Moodliar. Cumesh, welcome. This is a great opportunity for me because this is the final episode of Season 2 of our Reimagine Mental Health podcast. So I'm really thrilled that you were able to make it today.
Thanks very much, Kali. Great to be here and actually a great time to have this discussion.
Very much so. It's unusual to have a sit down with a CEO and not talk about financials and bottom lines, and instead to prioritize talking about mental health. Is this important to you and why?
Absolutely. I think we're living in broadly challenging times. And I think the kind of hidden stress that everyone lives with today, in my mind, is much more heightened levels than previously. So even just looking at this past weekend, I chat on WhatsApp to one or two of my colleagues, one who happens to be in Australia, where there was an incident in a shopping mall. And you suddenly realize, firstly, what a globally connected world we are, because an incident that historically would have been quite remote to you is closer. You've got a challenge of the global geopolitics, and then you bring it back into the context of SA. And I think given some of the prevailing conditions in SA, in the absence of clear results, and as we are seeing some progress though, people live with in my view, an overlay of additional stress. And we also live in a tough macroeconomic environment. So one, there's geopolitical tensions. Two, I think the safety and security is a challenge if living in SA in some respects. And three, a tough macroeconomic environment brings certain harsh economic realities home to various households and to people in their roles. Against the backdrop of some of those things, one of the quickest things to discount is mental health. I think it's easier when you see someone where there's a clear physical disability to have empathy and sympathy and put in place a support structure. And I say that not making light of any physical disability, because those are obviously significant, but a visible disability versus an invisible one carries very, very different responsibilities. And to my mind, the challenge about mental health is the fact that it often gets swept under the carpet and is not spoken about and is unseen. And it's, to me, the idea that we embrace it, that we engage about it, and just the ability to discuss it, to my mind, is half the battle won.
So you are relatively new in this position. I
Absolutely.
think it's a whole, from the time we're recording.
Literally, I think 2 weeks.
2 weeks,
yes.
Exactly 14 days as the Investec Bank CEO. This obviously then seems like a priority to you going forward at a business, but also I hear from you on a personal level, I think.
Yes, absolutely. I think growing up in what was a very challenging SA. I grew up in a household where my dad was a general practitioner and was one of those old school medical GPs where he did house calls. I would often, the only way I could get to spend time with him sometimes, not always, was to get in the car with him, go out when he was going to go and see patients, and realizing a couple of things. One, the economic disparities in SA and the pressure, tensions and inequality in service delivery was very manifest to me. And I think as we're entering a new period now, one of the things, in fact, it was my late dad who said to me then about mental health, was amidst everything you're dealing with, mental health is not a priority. He's not being diagnosed properly. He's not being diagnosed fully because of lack of access to proper healthcare. But two, real focus on primary healthcare was the 101 of what needed to be done and wasn't being done. And to add what would have been seen as a more sophisticated challenge being mental health care, that was only going to be further down the line. So I think the time to engage on these topics is now, and to create the opportunity and platform for it. So is it a priority? Absolutely. But obviously it's amidst all the other priorities that we will deal with, but a significant, clear understanding that we want to be able to create an openness and engagement for people.
So in your position as Investec Bank CEO, one would have a perception that you have got absolutely everything under control, that you are a high-functioning, which is absolutely right, I imagine, a high-functioning individual dealing tight deadlines, pressurized environment. How do you manage your personal mental health?
So, Katie, that's quite an interesting question, because there are moments in time when you realize that you are under significant pressure, you're under significant stress. In any of these types of roles, for all of us who play a role in leadership in Investec or in the group as a whole, you carry a lot of responsibility for others. And I think it's one thing when you carry responsibility for yourself, you can kind of deal with it. When you carry responsibility for others, there's a much higher burden and pressure and stress level that comes with it. A couple of things that have really helped me historically has been, one, identifying that you're in a moment of high stress and that you need to put in place some sort of parameters to rebalance yourself, because at the end of the day, also making decisions when in a highly stressed state is not necessarily the best outcome. So how do you bring a level of calmness to the situation? For me, it's sometimes, one, creating proper quiet time, private time,
and what
stepping away
like?
from the noise.
Phone off, TV off.
A long walk often, going for a quick run, jumping on an exercise bike and just putting in earpods, listening to music for 30 minutes, just distancing yourself to get perspective if you can. And the second was to build up a level of support system within the business. And often people that are not necessarily in your direct reporting line, but people who, one, removed, you can play a role as a sponsor, mentor, soundboard, wise, sage sort of role, and bring that other voice to you, because you realize that at times the phrase is leadership is lonely. And in many ways, I often think it doesn't have to be. And it's important that you do have a soundboard and someone that's deeply trusted that you can have a discussion with. And then the third piece for me is, within my own leadership team, historically within the bank, has been to make sure that we develop the relationship bandwidth to be able to manage the difficult conversations together, to be able to create a lot of that soundboarding within the team that you're operating in. And that takes a lot of relational work that you need to build, and it takes time to do that.
So the theme of this episode is finding hope. And particularly at this time in our country, we're going to elections very, very soon. From the time we've recorded this podcast, it's 44 days. By the time the podcast airs, it'll be much closer. Do you believe that it's important for someone like you in your position as a leader to have a positive outlook about the country broadly? And how do you think it affects your team's well-being? Everybody, from your most senior team members to your most junior team members in the business.
So, Katie, I think it's absolutely critical, if you in a leadership role, wherever you are, that you have a positive outlook. Because I think to take up your role without seeing the glass as being half full is very difficult. You need to be a source of support, optimism, and hope for your team and for the business that you lead, and also for the role that we play in broader society. I would balance that against being realistic and pragmatic about what optimism is. In other words, we can't wish away certain of current challenges that we may face, but we've got to be pragmatic about what are the potential solutions. How can we play a role to support it? How can we be the purveyors of hope, but also the purveyors of the positive change that we want to see?
What's South Africa's biggest challenge at the moment, do you think?
So, I think if I look at it right now, you need an overarching framework where people feel personal security is a given, that you would be safe and that you can operate. That's almost like a fundamental Maslow hierarchy of needs type discussion. Many people would say, actually, it's the right people in the right positions. But I think you need to take a step back and say, is the framework there that creates that? Will the right people be available to take those positions?
Is it possible, do you think? We've been down this road for many years in South Africa. Can we achieve a scenario where we do feel safe in our homes, driving, walking, cycling? You say you go running. Do you think it's possible?
I absolutely believe it's possible. And there are a number of examples that we've seen where it really has worked well. If I just take some of the initiatives, let's just take Sandton, where we're sitting right now. I look at the camera networks that have been put out across Sandton. That's actually led to a significant reduction in levels of crime in Sandton, because those cameras are monitored 24/7. They're supported by armed response by the Joburg Metro Police and South African Police Services. And that's a public-private sector initiative where a joint control room has been set up in Sandton. That's just one example. There are numerous other examples. So I believe there's that. I also do believe a capacitated National Prosecuting Authority, a capacitated SA Police Services are critical. I don't believe it's feasible or sustainable that you just have a significantly growing private sector security force. I think we've got to make sure that we've got a capacitated state in those basic functions, and that's one of the key roles for the role of the state in governing.
Does corporate South Africa have a responsibility to get involved and have these conversations with government, as opposed to just fixing things on your own? Is engagement a critical part of what corporate SA needs to do to help fix things, in inverted commas?
So to my mind, it can never exist. One cannot exist without the other. The idea that corporate SA can step in and be the inverted commas, knights in shining armor is not going to be sustainable. I believe a deep partnership between government, corporate SA and civil society. And I add civil society because those are the three sectors that need to intersect in a way that's able to give a community-owned outcome as well. So there's one thing just creating the platform of, okay, let's go and fix the traffic lights down the road, or let's go and fix the fencing that keeps getting stolen from a school because the school's no longer safe. If the community living around that school don't see the importance of the fencing, don't see the importance of keeping the school safe, you don't win. And government's role in that is also got to be the overarching thematic needs to be addressed. And the CEO initiative has over 130 CEOs of corporates, SA, represented in a forum working together with government and other sectors of civil society and created 3 very effective work streams from what I can see. You've got one around crime and corruption, which is doing some significant work, and it's systemic work and fundamental work. So it's not about, oh, we need to go and make sure that person gets prosecuted or this crime gets followed up. It's overarching, how do we look at the systemic approach? The second one is around transport and logistics, and the third one is around energy.
Is the CEO pledge, because I loved it when I first read about it all those months ago, and I think South Africans who read it thought, oh, good, there's certainly some traction and positivity happening. I think we are desperate for signs of hope and positivity, and that things will certainly improve for our country.
Absolutely. There has certainly been tangible delivery in some of those work streams. If you take the transport work stream, for example, and again, I'm not represented on it, but I've been reading the feedback, certain key work around railway lines that were having security issues. Some of the mining companies have stepped up in partnership with Transnet, in partnership with government, to provide the necessary security to protect those lines. There's a lot of other good work that's being done that has to create the perspective of progress. And that's not lip service about progress. This is real tangible steps. I don't think any of the business leaders involved in this are there to be part of an electioneering initiative. They're there to make a real change.
If you were to describe in this moment now South Africa to a foreign investor or a tourist, what would you say to them?
I would say we're a country rich in natural resources, a country rich in human resources. We have a good legislative framework. We have a very effective justice system. Our courts are well functioning. I'd say we have very good monetary policy from the Central Reserve Bank, Minister of Finance guidelines, and also National Treasury. I would say that we do need work in terms of core infrastructure. What I would say is that I can see literally light at the end of the tunnel from an energy crisis perspective. We've seen how the restructure of Eskom starting to deliver some results. I suppose I think we're in day 19 or day 20 of no load shedding. I'm not saying it's exactly because of that, but certainly some positive results. You've seen private sector start to deliver, I think it's close to 10,000 megawatts of additional power to the grid through various initiatives. You've seen the growth of home solar initiatives as well. So I think there's a clear path ahead. And that was one of the immediate challenges in the last 5 years, and we're all painfully aware of that. I think that the opportunity to invest in SA, there's still very good infrastructure in numerous areas and across other areas that I think we could invest in. Our port system can be saved. I don't believe we're in the disastrous situation we were in probably 3-4 months ago. I think there's a lot of basic work that's being done, and we're seeing some positive initiatives around the outsourcing of those. Also, from a tourism perspective, we have an incredibly beautiful country. And it's not just about the Garden Route, but including the Garden Route, areas in the Western Cape, areas in Mpumalanga, the Kruger Park. There's just so many positive aspects that we can actually position SA very differently. So for international tourism, you could actually say the weakened currency presents an incredible opportunity. So I think there's lots to do, lots of work ahead, but also real opportunity.
Let's look at the opposite. Young South Africans who are looking about studying or working, what's your message to them to stay and invest themselves in this country?
From a young person's perspective, if you're prepared to put your shoulder to the grindstone, it is a country where people will get recognized and rewarded because in many areas still have scarce skills. So if you skill yourself up, if you're studying further, if you're focusing on your own self-development, we're not a fully developed market economy where you're competing with thousands of people with similar skills to you. So the ability to educate, the ability to skill yourself up. And this isn't just about talking about go and study, tech and become an AI specialist. This is also sometimes around artisan skills. It's around skills that we need to build. So sometimes the barriers to entry aren't as high here. So I think globally, you been a far more fiercely competitive labour market. And I look at some of the states in the US where the debates around what we consider fundamental basic human rights, the debates are very different.
Very.
And that's in a very
And worrying.
advanced and worrying and concerning. And I look at SA, we've created a constitutional dispensation which is world class. We battle to implement certain aspects of it at times, but there's a framework here that can give you a very different opportunity.
Let's talk very quickly, and as we start wrapping up, about a leader like Nelson Mandela. He used to call up, and in fact, Stephen Kossef, very well known in Investec here, he used to call Stephen up and say to him, I need a school in Mthatha. I need desks in a certain area. Is that the kind of relationship, just going back to that government and corporate connectivity, that you think is important? Tell us what you need. Let's see how we can come in and fix it. Or have we passed that stage completely and now we're leaving it more or less to government, with corporate South Africa as part of the CEO pledge helping where and when they can in those 3 areas you described?
I'd just take a step back. I think if I look at the state capture era in SA, and during that era, the relationship, and I certainly can talk from my perspective, our perspective, the relationship between the state, civil society and business took significant pressure and in fact probably led to an alienation between the 3 spheres. And in my view, that was obviously quite damaging. The rebuilding of that is taking place. We referenced the CEO initiative earlier. That's certainly one of the areas where I think there's a rebuilding of the relationship between corporate SA and government, and in a very constructive way. There was a trust deficit created during the state capture era, and that's just the reality of it.
Very much so. Thank you for that, Cumesh. I really appreciate you just giving us an insight into your thinking, actually, as you take the reins here as Investec Bank CEO. I want to ask you a set of rapid questions now. It's what we call rapid fire. Don't think too much about these. You mustn't think a lot about them. It's kind of whatever drops into your mind in that moment, something that'll just get South Africans to get to know you a little better. Are you ready?
Sure.
All right, let's go. You mentioned your earpods earlier.
Yes.
What music are you listening to?
At the moment, I listen to quite a bit of what would be old generation music, like U2. Coldplay is one of my favorite bands. U2, one of my favorite bands.
Glass half full or glass half empty?
A glass half full.
Who's your favorite person?
I've got many.
What are you binge watching on Netflix?
I was watching a series called The Gentleman over the Easter weekend.
Nice. Yeah. Yes, I've seen that. It's lovely.
I find it an interesting parody on life.
When was the last time you laughed? But like truly, truly laughed?
Yesterday, actually.
And cried?
About 4 weeks ago.
What was your lowest mark in matric?
I think it was for Afrikaans.
Do you remember what it was?
It could have been a D, if I recall, a C or a D.
Favorite comfort food?
It sounds stereotypical to an Indian male, but lamb curry.
Do you say sorry easily?
I think I do. I actually asked my wife the other day in reference to something else, and she said, I don't think you do often enough. So there was no response. But in the business sense, I'd like to think I do. But maybe I need to take some lessons at home.
What are you reading?
At the moment, I'm actually reading a book on tech and tech trends for 2024.
Do you read newspapers daily?
I do, absolutely.
Do you listen to the news?
I do.
Do you watch TV news?
I'm actually obsessive about the news. So the first thing I often do, waking up at 5:36 a.m., is flicking through all the news online and then putting on the news while I have breakfast or exercise.
What was the last silliest thing you tweeted on X?
I actually haven't tweeted on X, full stop.
Oh, there we go. And finally, I would be remiss not to ask you this. What is your ideal Rand-dollar exchange?
15 Rand 50 is where we think it should be.
15.50. I like that. Excellent. Cumesh Moodliar, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Katie.
It's really been lovely to get to know you and also to see how you have prioritized mental health as a business, as the host of Reimagine Mental Health with Investec Life. It certainly has been so encouraging.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
This brings us to the end of Season 2 of our Reimagine Mental Health podcast series, brought to you by Investec Life, an authorized FSP and licensed insurer. I've loved hosting both Season 1 and Season 2 and look forward to catching up with you again on Season 3. If you'd like to hear the rest of our podcasts, please subscribe to Investec Focus Radio SA wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, goodbye from me, Katie Catapodis, and the Investec Life team. The views expressed are those of the contributors at the time of publication and do not necessarily represent the views of the firm and should not be taken as advice or recommendations. Investec Bank Limited, an authorized financial service provider and registered credit provider. Investec Life Limited is a licensed life insurance company and an authorized financial services provider. T's and C's apply.